So, introduction to sequences. Okay, so to start out with, when we talk about sequences, there's some vocabulary that we're going to want to get out of the way first. So, vocab, let's talk about superscript and subscript. Superscript, subscript. Then we'll talk about sequences and terms of the sequence. So these are the 4 words we're going to kind of use as our main vocabulary for this little lesson. So first of all, for sequences, we're going to need subscripts, but to help us understand subscripts, we're going to contrast it with a superscript. So you've probably used superscripts before. In fact, I know you have. When we use exponents in mathematics, we use superscripts. So, for instance, x squared. Now, we're going to be a little bit picky about this. Remember back in elementary school when we first learned how to write, they had this paper that had the top line, the bottom line, and then that halfway line there. And so you knew that if you were doing a lowercase x, you write it there. Well, the superscript, you don't have to make your x's that size. Notice I'm going to be a little larger here, but I'm just trying to demonstrate that a superscript has its center at the top of whatever you're writing it next to. So if I was writing x squared, that's where it would go. But if I want to do a capital X and then square it, this is where it would go. So when we do exponents, those are actually superscripts. So you've probably seen a little button or an option in your word processor that looks kind of like this. That's for superscripts. Anytime you want to write something in small letters or small numbers, just kind of above, a little bit higher than the rest of your letters or numbers, you would select the superscript option. Now the other one that we're going to do is subscript. So this one is superscript. The prefix super means above. So that's how you know it's exponents or superscript. Now when we do subscript, if I were to do the same thing but with a subscript, I would write it down here. So again, if we put our lines like this, if I wanted to write a lowercase x with a subscript of 2, that's what I would put there. Now these aren't exponents. When they're written down below and we use subscript, they're not exponents. We usually use subscript when we want to number things. So like you probably noticed on your graphing calculator when you hit the y equals button, you're going to have a y1, a y2. Those are going to represent different graphs that you're going to do. So if you're just trying to number them, you put a subscript to number them off. So x sub 2 is what we would say, and this is a capital X sub 2. So a subscript, the prefix sub means below. So notice again that the center of that little 2 is even with the bottom of the letter. So when you're writing your subscript, and of course like with a y, the tail of the y hangs down below the line, but if you just imagine where the top part of that y is this bottom line here. So it's even with that. Okay, a common mistake that I see when people are writing subscripts is, for instance, if they're doing x sub 2, is they write it like this. That's not a subscript. Yeah, you made it a tiny bit smaller, but it's not a subscript because it's not written below, hanging down a little bit below the bottom line there. So remember, subscripts have to hang down a little. So not that one, but this one, because it has to hang down. We're going to use subscripts when we describe sequences, or when we use notation for sequences. So just keep that in mind, superscript versus subscript. So now let's go ahead and talk about sequences. So, okay, with sequences, you probably actually already know what a sequence is. A lot of people already do when they get to this point in math. You've had a little introduction before. And you've probably heard of something called a sequence of events. A sequence of events is just where you have a bunch of different events that are happening in a certain order. So sequence of events is a bunch of events happening in a certain order. A sequence in mathematics is going to be either numbers or symbols happening in a certain order, like a list. So an example of a sequence is going to be, let's do for our example, 7, 11, 15, 19, 23, 27. You probably get the pattern, and you can go on and on. So this dot, dot, dot that I make here at the end, that just means that it goes on forever and ever indefinitely, following the same pattern if there is a pattern. So in this sequence, there's obviously a pattern. If we were to describe this sequence, we may want to describe it other than just saying 7, 11, 15, 19, 23, 27. We need some more tools to be able to describe the sequence so that people will be able to tell this sequence apart from another sequence. So let's go ahead and do our next vocabulary word. Before I do that, actually, let's write down a sequence is a list of numbers or symbols in a defined order. If we mixed these numbers up, it wouldn't be the same sequence. So we've defined the sequence to be an increasing sequence. It gets larger and larger by a set pattern. So when we talk about a sequence, each individual number in the sequence, let me write this down, each individual number in this sequence is called a term of the sequence. Sorry, my handwriting is so terrible. I'm actually writing this sideways to work out with my camera. So, okay, so each individual number in the sequence is called a term of the sequence. So, for instance, the first term of the sequence is a 7. The fourth term of the sequence is 19. So I can write, now we haven't established any notation for this yet, so I'm just going to write it out using English. I'm going to say the first term of this sequence is 7. The fourth term is 19. Okay, so now in mathematics is actually its own language, so we try and come up with symbols that represent our words and our sentences. So instead of saying the first term of this sequence is 7, you've already learned that we can replace the word is with an equal sign. So now we just need to learn the symbols that we use to say the first term of the sequence. So that's when our subscripts come in. So typically, for any given sequence, we'll name it using a letter. So let's go ahead and use the letter capital U. So we're going to use capital U to represent the sequence. So then for the first term, we're going to do U sub 1. So in this case, U sub 1, and we say that U sub 1. Sub is for subscript. So U sub 1 is equal to 7 in this case. So that's just a way the first term is 7, where it starts with a 7.